Every time we train, we get worse. Every time we work out, we get weaker. And it's only when we actually allow ourselves to recover that we get better, that we improve. But what is recovery? Because it's not just time off the bike. Knowing when to push and when to ease off has always been something of an art form. Recently though, there have been some big advances in technology, including around heart rate variability. They've unlocked some incredible insights into what actually constitutes recovery. Now, to find out what that is, we have been invited out to Boston by industry leaders Whoop. They're going to explain the tech and just what we can learn from it in order to optimize our recovery. Now, hopefully there are going to be some easy wins, because having just stepped off a transatlantic flight, I could really do with some. Before we get on to understanding recovery, let's get some backstory. Whoop was founded in 2011 by two university students. A physiology graduate called Will Ahmed. As an athlete himself, his quest was to be able to quantify what training was doing to his body. He then joined up with a mathematics boffin called John Capodilupo. Their idea was to generate data, including heart rate variability, using a wristband. Now this is version 1. It has, as you can see, evolved immeasurably since those earliest days until now, where you have Whoop 3.0. Now, do keep your eyes on the pro peloton. You'll see an awful lot of very high-profile riders unofficially using these. Same on the off-road side of the sport, actually including world cross-country champion Kate Courtney and even our own Jeremy Powers. Now, the hardware, though, is only part of the story. Whoop's patents lie in the software that goes with this and allows you to interpret that data. Firstly, we need to know a little bit more about HRV, or heart rate variability, which has been likened to your secret life force. Such is the level of information you can actually extract from it. To help explain the science behind it, we're talking to Emily Capodilupo, who is the Director of Analytics at Whoop, and also a self-confessed sleep nerd, which is kind of cool. Presumably you're quite well rested coming into this one then. Okay, so perhaps you could start by explaining actually what HRV is.
Sure, so HRV stands for heart rate variability, and it's a measure of the difference in timing between successive heartbeats. So a lot of times you hear from your doctor, right, that your resting heart rate's 60 beats per minute, and you might think that you can sort of do that math and then figure that means that your heart's beating once a second on the second, but in reality that's almost never the case. So sometimes it'll beat after like 1.1 seconds, sometimes 0.9, and the greater that difference is between, if you're going from like 0.9 to 1.1 back to 0.8 and then up again or whatever, the higher the HRV, and that's generally considered a good sign. In
my situation then, so for example, I flew over last night, like I'm pretty jet lagged, I got rubbish sleep. I'm not making excuses again, but what would I expect to see from heart rate variability then in that case? So I would expect to see less heart rate variability, given that I'm a bit fatigued?
You expect it to be lower because you're gonna be having a stress response to the travel, and to the lack of sleep, and to the fact that your circadian rhythm's thrown off. So all of that is gonna sort of put power behind the sympathetic side of your nervous system, which is going to suppress the parasympathetic side, and so you're going to start to see like higher heart rate, lower heart rate variability, and if we looked at your blood as well, you'd see like higher cortisol levels, for example, so kind of reflecting that.
And am I right in thinking that your heart rate variability throughout the day is less important to what you guys do with the data than a specific period of time?
Yeah, so heart rate variability is like this extremely interesting metric because it's like anything that affects your nervous system affects heart rate variability. But the flip side to that is that it's somewhat of a non-specific metric. So like if somebody that you're attracted to walks by, you're gonna have like a really strong sympathetic response and HRV is gonna go down for a second, right? But it doesn't actually mean that you're like less fit or like less ready to work out, right? You're just having a physiological response. And if you're hot, it's gonna go down. If you hydrate, it'll go up a little bit. And so it's constantly moving throughout the day based on things that are meaningless. And so if like more meaningless things happen or fewer meaningless things happen, you're gonna have like a higher or lower average HRV. And unless we have just like an insane amount of contextual data, you kind of can't do that much just like knowing what your HRV did, which is why Whoop specifically reports HRV taken during sleep when you're sort of not like hypersensitive to all of these things that like ultimately don't predict something that you'd be like interested in measuring. Basically, the way that HRV works is you can think of your body as having a finite number of resources. And when your HRV is really high, that means that your body is sort of in a position where it can allocate those resources. They're sort of not tied up. And when your HRV gets low, when the sympathetic nervous system is dominating, it's because sort of there are physiological requirements on you to do things that require that like active part of your autonomic nervous system to be running the show. And so those resources become not available. So when your HRV is really high, you can take all these resources that are ready to be allocated and say put them into your legs and then cycle faster, and put them into your cardiovascular system and burn fat and all the different active processes that are required that you kind of want to put to work in this moment of your workout. And then after the workout, you have those resources freed up again to do things like repair the muscles, and so to convert that exercise stimulus into a fitness gain. Now, if your body is sort of busy with things like you're fighting off an infection, and therefore you're sending those resources to your immune system, then they're just simply not available to be allocated towards cycling or anything else. And so when you go and try and say, okay, I'm gonna give it all I got, well, all you have in that moment is maybe 60%. Whereas if your HRV is really high and you can put all those resources into cycling, then all you have is maybe 98%. There's always some has to go to breathing and stuff. So you're never gonna have 100%, but not sort of wasting those resources on your immune system, things like being stressed, and so having all this sort of elevated cortisol levels and all that kind of stuff just means that you can put them towards your sport, which is sort of a lower priority thing.
Okay, so with a Whoop band on, obviously we don't need to check blood or anything. So how is that actually measuring heart rate variability and resting heart rate? I figured I can understand that one, but the variability as well, it's just a really accurate heart rate monitor?
Yeah, so we use a technology called photoplethysmography, or PPG, and that's the sort of the lights.
Okay, cool.
And so what we do is we shine into your skin, and it's the very, very top, most superficial layer of skin, a specific frequency of light. In our case, it's green, and hemoglobin, which is the molecule in your red blood cells that carries oxygen, specifically absorbs this wavelength, and it reflects all the other wavelengths. And so we have this little light shining, this green light into your skin, and then we have a photoreceptor, which is reading whatever light gets reflected back. And the difference between what we put in and what we put out, or what we get bounced back out, is very cleanly correlated with how much hemoglobin is directly under the sensor at that moment. And so as you watch the hemoglobin go up and down, that's basically caused by the pulses of your heart rate. And so PPG it's delayed from heart rate by a couple of fractions of a millisecond, because the blood has to travel from your heart to your wrist, but that happens at a roughly constant rate. And so we can sort of watch your heartbeat go by. So there's been a bunch of studies looking at sort of the reliability of PPG as compared to EKG. And as long as you're sort of getting a clean signal, they're perfectly comparable.
Now the hardware element is just one small part of Whoop. So how do you interpret the data then that you're getting from the band?
Yeah, so that's really the secret sauce. So at a super high level, right, we get this PPG signal, but there's a whole bunch of different things that can make that signal difficult to turn into heartbeats. We have a whole signal processing team, which is a room of geniuses, and that's the only thing they work on is turning that PPG signal into heart rates, and we do that better than any other wearable on the market, partially because it's a team of geniuses doing hard work, but also partially because the whole Whoop from the ground up was designed to optimize this signal. So we've made different trade-offs than some of our competitors, things like having a higher sampling rate. We've hyper optimized the specific frequency of light that we're using, and then just thousands of hours of testing. And so we're able to extract every single piece of information possible from that signal.
Yeah. The other insights you've been able to gather then, because I guess you've got quite a rich archive of data on, on people's recovery and so forth. So what other things would an athlete be able to see and look out for in their own day-to-day life, and that will help them recover faster and therefore train more effectively?
So alcohol is obviously like one that we talk about a lot because it more or less has the same effect on everybody, and so it's something that everybody's kind of familiar with, so it's sort of easy to understand. One of the things that's been really cool with the Whoop platform is that it can help you understand not just things that have massive effects like binge drinking, but also things that have really subtle effects and that maybe have high interperson variability in their effects. So like we've had a bunch of people try like mindfulness or meditation at night and like looked at the effect on their HRV from that. And that effect is really small, but with a system like Whoop, we can capture a small effect. And so that's like pretty much across the board helpful. But then there's other products like...
Sorry, just go back. So potentially doing meditation will actually improve your recovery?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we kind of love about mindfulness and meditation is that it's 15 minutes, it's free, it's like pretty easy, and it makes a difference. There's so much like low-hanging fruit, like being hydrated, obviously, like every cyclist knows is gonna impact performance, like meditating, even like sleeping at the same time every night and waking up at the same time in the morning is like, even if you're getting enough sleep, but you're sort of doing it randomly, by making that sleep more consistent, you're gonna see like more slow wave sleep, more REM sleep, higher recovery scores the next day. So there's like a lot of little things that are very accessible that sort of Whoop can help you understand.
Wow. And what about stress and anxiety then? Because I guess that ties into mindfulness. Can you detect that through heart rate variability and all the other parameters?
Kind of. So like I said, like HRV is a very non-specific metric. So I don't know if your HRV is like down right now because you're stressed or because you're hot, because they're both going to make it go down, and it's going to go down sort of the same way. But what we have seen is that if you have like a sudden life change event and all of a sudden there's a lot more stress in your life, you'll see sort of HRV fall off that cliff and stay low. And so what it creates is not necessarily a immediate, like conclusive diagnosis, but it just opens up this opportunity to have a conversation, especially with like a coach who might be on the platform, to say like, wow, your HRV's fallen off a cliff. As far as I know, like your training hasn't changed that much. What's going on? And then like that conversation can help kind of elicit what's going on. So Whoop doesn't really replace humans. It just kind of helps spark these conversations. Are
you able to use the information to perhaps gain insight on a personal level about what may or may not help as well? So you've got the kind of the golden rules about sleep and alcohol, but nutrition's a big one, isn't it? People often talk about like, I gave up gluten and I feel better, or I eat more vegetables and I feel better. Can the information that Whoop gives you actually be used as kind of like a self-diagnostic tool for helping to refine your diet and so forth? Yeah, so the term we use is like self-experimenting, not self-diagnosing, because we're not a medical device. But you can use Whoop to sort of run these little personalized experiments. So let's say for 2 weeks I don't change anything. That becomes my baseline, and then I cut out gluten, right? And then I can see like, did actually anything statistically significant happen here? And if it did, great, I've discovered something about myself. And if it didn't, then I know that like maybe you're gluten sensitive, and so just because my buddy is sort of swearing by this, which I think happens a lot, and so everybody's like, well, this athlete who I really look up to swears that like, going off gluten helped. And that might be completely true, but unless you try it yourself, like you might just be restricting your diet for no reason. When I think back to when I was full-time cycling, it would take quite a lot of pressure off, because those decisions that you worry about day to day, like, whether I should eat something, or whether I should go out, I can go out this evening, or am I ready, like good to train today? If there was something to help you make those decisions, you can kind of almost sit back and be like, okay, well that's cool, like I can do this, I can do that. And I think it would have been very useful, if I'm completely honest. But it's also annoying to hear you say that it existed in the 80s, and I'm like, oh man, I wasn't wasn't in the 80s, I was in like the 2000s and I still didn't know.
It wasn't in endurance sports until really quite recently. The power lifters sort of got it first, and it was like their little secret for a really long time. But they noticed that when your HRV was high, your like 1 rep max would go up because you were able to like recruit all of your neurons to fire at the same time. So a big thing with like 1 rep maxes and those like really intense short activities, that like it's as much about like all of your neurons like pulling on your muscles at the same time as it is literally like muscle mass, which is why like, you know, your muscles don't change that much day to day, but you can lift different amounts day to day. And so they were very interested in this sort of like direct measure of your autonomic nervous system balance.
Let's talk sleep, shall we? So your personal kind of field of expertise, I guess. The analytics that Whoop can give you about sleep is far more detailed than the length of time you're asleep for. So what kind of have you learnt or do you know already that Whoop can kind of show you in terms of what type of sleep you should be after or how you can improve your sleep or all those kind of important factors?
Yeah, so I guess for people who don't know, Whoop will auto-detect the fact that you're asleep or napping. And then once we detect that you're asleep, we divide that sleep into one of 4 sleep stages. So you're either awake, you're in light sleep, you're in slow wave sleep, which is the physically restorative part of sleep, or REM sleep, which is the mentally restorative part of sleep. And we knew for a really long time, both from sort of, you know, literature that predates Whoop, but also from like, you know, our own analysis of our data, that, you know, the more slow wave sleep you get, sort of the higher your HRV is going to be the next day, the more REM sleep you get, you know, you're going to see the effect on performance and stuff like that. But what was really kind of like not well understood is like what you can do in order to affect that. So we know that sort of our bodies are going to allocate time within sleep to the stages that it determines that we need, provided that you're giving your body the opportunity to get into those deep stages of sleep. And so there's a lot of like little things you can do, like the more conducive your environment is to sleep, the more of those deeper stages you'll get. So having your room be dark, quiet, not too warm, even like good air quality, stuff like that. One of the things we discovered, I guess 2 years ago now, is that the one of the most in control factors that determines how much slow wave and REM sleep you get is how consistent your bedtime is. And that's really coming from maintaining a healthy circadian rhythm. And so you can give yourself, you know, 8 hours to sleep or 10 hours to sleep. And if you're doing that sort of at random times, you're gonna get sort of less good quality sleep than if whatever you're getting, even if it's slightly less, it is, you know, perfectly consistent night to night. And so that's like one of the big things we've been trying to educate our athletes on for the last, you know, year and a half, 2 years, because it's so completely perfectly in your control.
Well, my mind is ever so slightly blown after that. I'll be completely honest. I think back to when I was a pro cyclist many years ago now, and I just imagine the confidence that having this kind of information at my fingertips would have given me. I think I tended to err on the side of caution in terms of trailing load, having overcooked it a couple of times earlier on in my career. I just can't but think, imagine being able to know categorically that information. We'll have a video over on the tech channel, which will actually be filmed in the future, but going out at the same time as this one, where we'll go into a bit more detail about how you use the app and the tech involved in that specifically. In the meantime, if you haven't clicked through to that video, please make sure you give this one a thumbs up.